Are we waiting for Eric? Or do you want me to?
You're good to go.
You want me to take over?
Yep.
Let me go get the agenda. Okay. Okay, in the interest of the public's time, I'm going to take over and conduct the meeting until Commissioner Thomas shows up. I'm Vice Chairman Brandon Mason, and I welcome everybody to the Planning Commission meeting this evening. My apologies for arriving a few minutes late. My work kind of kept me late. So we'll start as we always do with invocation of thought by Commissioner Barker. Are you prepared to do that? Following which I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Barker.
Father in heaven, we come to you this planning commission meeting. We're grateful that we could be here to be able to review and discuss and those things taking place in North Ogden. Please help us remember why we're here, the purpose which we serve, and to keep in mind that those things which are important and strive to those things which are beneficial for everybody. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Please rise and repeat the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Call, do we have anybody on Zoom this evening?
We do.
We do have people?
Yes, we have two.
Okay, so because we are a hybrid meeting where we have people physically in attendance and some on Zoom, I'm going to read an opening meeting statement that pertains to both parties. It's just slightly different. So before each agenda item begins, city staff will give a report. After the staff report, the item will be opened up for other speakers. The applicant will speak first and be allowed up to 10 minutes. Following the applicant, any other interested person will be allowed to speak for up to 3 minutes. The applicant has final rebuttal time of up to 5 minutes. Any materials that are displayed or referenced, for example, pictures or written materials, are part of the record and must be left with the commission. Speakers are required to have signed in at the door, will state their name and address before beginning their remarks. If you agree with the previous speaker, then please state your agreement to avoid repetitious remarks. Speakers shall address the commission from the podium or microphone and shall address all comments to the planning commission. And please silence your cell phones. Okay, so obviously for people on Zoom, it's a little bit different where you're not going to have signed in, but please state your name on the Zoom meeting. If you do want to speak at the appropriate time, there's a hand raise feature in there, and at which time we'll try to elevate you and get you to speak before the planning commission. Of course, we're interested in hearing public input from both people physically or the people on Zoom. So thank you. Okay. By way of roll call, looks like we do have a quorum today. We know that Commissioner Thomas is not here yet. We have no reason to believe he's not coming. Okay, who else are we missing?
Commissioner Watson.
Oh, Commissioner Watson. I happen to know that. Okay, Commissioner Watson will have to be excused. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, do we have any ex parte communications or conflict of interest that would need to be disclosed before tonight's meeting? In the absence of any of those, we'll move on. So it's time for public comments. If you do have a public comment for an item that is on the agenda tonight, we'd ask you to please wait till the appropriate time to make them to a more pertinent time in the meeting. If you have general comments that you'd like to have us here, we're willing to entertain those at this time. Nobody on Zoom? No. Okay, so we have no general comments for us. Let's move right into our administrative section. So administrative item, this is number 5 on your agenda. Consideration and action on an administrative application for preliminary approval of the Mountain Medical Center subdivision located approximately 2650 North Washington Boulevard, presented by Brandon Bell.
Commissioner Mason, good evening, members of the commission. This is for a one-lot subdivision. It's actually some properties that are being combined, and then property line that's being adjusted between 2 other pieces of property. And typically this sort of subdivision would not come to the planning commission, but there's a possibility or likelihood of property dedication, and that triggers the requirement to come to planning commission. There are just a few details that staff needs to mention. The setback requirement for this subdivision, this type of subdivision in this zone is 20 feet for all buildings. And then there's an 8,000 square foot lot requirement. The proposed subdivision lot meets the minimum area requirements, and it likely meets the 20-foot setback, but we just don't have certainty on that. So staff has requested as a recommended condition of approval that that the applicant verify that the building that they demonstrate on just a version of the plat, not that one that would be recorded, but just show us what the distance is to the closest point of the building. There is a bay window at the front, and we'd like to see it from that bay window, which is the closest point, and then maybe also to the body of the building. But they could just demonstrate that it's either demonstrate that it's 20 feet or greater, if it's shown not to be the property line actually in this case can be adjusted so that the sidewalk is in an easement or a portion of it, including 1 foot of property behind the sidewalk can be in that easement as well. So it shouldn't be a problem getting to meet those requirements, but we just need some additional information. There are some technical items regarding how the plat was drawn that need to be adjusted. It's been our understanding that the county actually requires that when two properties are being adjusted, that both of them be shown entirely on the plat. This version of the plat that's been provided doesn't show that, doesn't show the entirety of the parcel to the west where property is being taken from. And so staff has, in the written version of the report, has recommended a conditional approval that the entirety of the city-owned parcel to the west that property is being taken from be shown on the plat so that it's clear what's left in that parcel. And that includes bearing angles and also distances on the lines of that. Staff would like to amend that recommendation at this time simply to be that recommendation unless the county does not require that. The purpose of that recommendation is for protection of future property owners, so that they know what is left in the differing parcels. And so we've been pretty consistent about that. But if the applicant emailed me earlier and said, if it's possible to not do that, could we not do that? Essentially, and staff's response is that we think it's best to require it unless the county says, because they have to go and get approved by the county essentially before they're recorded. They're reviewing it more for legal purposes of, again, future property owners and making sure that it works for them. So they have the information they need to know what properties are actually bought in the future. A couple of details is, let's see. The application should also show the existing property line between the two existing parcels that are being combined. They're to the north and south of one another. And then the applicant should identify existing former parcel numbers on the plat. I received an updated version of the plat earlier today about 4:30. I didn't have time to review it in detail, and so I believe that these last two conditions have been met, but would like to just keep them as recommended conditions so that I can be clear that they're met and take them as requirements for an updated version. So I think that covers all of my comments. Staff recommendation is that this subdivision be approved with the recommended conditions of approval that are listed in the staff report in the written version. They're a little more clear potentially, but we recommend approval subject to those conditions, with the one addition of unless the county doesn't require the full property of the western parcel to be shown. Are there any questions that the commission has for myself?
I assume not worried about sidewalks at this time.
The sidewalks have been addressed mainly in site plan, but actually one of the reasons why dedication for the property is required on this plat is along Washington Boulevard is because sidewalk is being required to be put in. And so that was addressed as part of the site plan. This is just more the legal side of dividing the.
Okay.
Why wasn't the sidewalk on this drawing then? I'm sorry to do it, but, you know, we walked that and we realized how difficult it is to put a sidewalk there. We just talked about,
Yeah.
should we have a sidewalk there?
So the reason why is it's just a matter of what information goes on what documents. The applicant has been working pretty extensively with the city engineer to locate the sidewalk, and the requirement on the site plan was that the applicant would put in the sidewalk at a location that was worked out with the city engineer. And that has been worked out. The sidewalk is going to be along Washington Boulevard. And so that was already required in a prior version.
Is this gonna hug the street then?
That's what's been worked out with the city engineer. So sidewalks aren't typically shown on subdivision documents because it's essentially more legal documents just to show the location of new property lines.
Like what's on the screen is what the plat is. This
Okay.
is what they
That makes
look
sense.
like.
Okay.
I just was fixated on it as well because
Yeah,
we did a visit, we walked it, I didn't know where a
Was an
sidewalk would
issue,
go, you know, that was complicated.
yeah. I know they worked to remove some signs and things like that with the
There's a long discussion.
engineer. So,
It was valuable to go look at it though, for sure.
did you have a question, Commissioner?
Oh, no,
Oh, thought you were sure.
nope. Moved. I moved.
Like an eagle.
Yeah, you are.
Are there any other questions for me?
Okay. Thank you, Brandon. So in absence of any other, I hate this chair. Have I mentioned I hate the baby chair? Yes, I'm gonna get a throne here when I conduct. No, I'm fine, really. I was making a big deal of it.
It's just like.
I've had that chair.
All right,
It's
I'm
like
gonna-
Sitting at the kids'
I
table.
know, I thought
It's
you were sitting
a-
at a good height.
Mace, welcome to my world.
I thought you looked at regular height for the rest of us, right?
Thank you for indulging me, public members and people on Zoom. I feel so much more empowered now that I'm not 6 inches lower than everyone else. Okay.
To
Okay, so thank you for your presentation, Mr. Bell. Would our applicant like to address us on this item?
Val Paul, 3823 Evergreen Drive in Pleasant View, but we own Water Animal Hospital, so appreciate everybody's help. Then this has been quite a little project. Brandon and Scott have really gone to bat, and the engineer too. There, it's been nice to work with him. So we'll apply with all these recommendations. That just so that you know, there's 34 plus feet from the bay window to the property line, so we're good to go that way.
Okay.
And I think everything else is in good shape. So. Once again, thanks for your time, your service in this. I think we're just about there. So
Thank you. Okay, do we have any public wishing to comment on the matter? Nobody present, nobody on Zoom?
Nope.
Okay, discussion, and let's get a motion on the table that we can discuss.
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we grant preliminary approval of the Mountain Medical Center subdivision, subject to the conditions recommended in the staff report, with the one exception that if the county does not require that the city property to the west to be fully shown, that not be a requirement.
okay. I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Let's discuss this motion. Any discussion on that?
I think it's well done, well presented.
Yeah, I think staff did a good job of kind of a complicated, piece of property with the city property involved, and it's good to me.
If we have time to go walk over that one time, it's easy to see it.
Okay, I'm not sensing any concerns or any reason to not call for a vote, so let's go ahead and call for a vote. Commissioner Lund, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Webb? how do you
Yes.
vote? Mr. Barker?
Yes,
Commissioner Nancaro?
Yes.
And I'm a yes, motion passes. Okay, brings us into our legislative item. Our planning commission has a little more discretion. Legislative item number 6 is a public hearing, consideration and recommendation on a legislative amendment regarding accessory building standards in multifamily zones, the R2, R3, and R4 zones presented by Kai Johnson.
Planning Commission members, as Commissioner Mason was saying, this is regarding multifamily zones. Since this is our first legislative item, I will read the legislative decision. When the city is considering a legislative matter, the Planning Commission is acting as a recommending body to the City Council. The city has wide discretion in taking legislative action. Examples of legislative actions are general plan, zoning map, and land use text amendments. Legislative actions require that the Planning Commission give a recommendation to the City Council. Typically, the criteria for making a decision related to a legislative matter require compatibility with the general plan and existing codes. Okay, so part of the reason this is coming before us is recently the standards for accessory buildings in the residential zone were amended. And then we had a resident come in with a preliminary site plan for an accessory building in an R2 zone, multifamily zone. And we kind of noticed that the standards in the multifamily zones are quite a bit less restrictive and not consistent with the R18 and R10 zones. So, and we had a discussion with the City Council, and they kind of recommended to bring the standards in line. So John, can you bring up that section of the code, the site development standards? So down at the site development standards here is kind of what we were thinking. So right now in the R2 zone, a 3-foot setback from the property lines, the building can be 15 feet tall. Whereas in an R18 or R10 zone, it would require a 10-foot setback to have that same height. Additionally, there's not a reference to the requirement that large accessory buildings or accessory buildings over 200 square feet are integrated into the design of the home. So we can include that reference as well. And we're thinking to just add this table from the R18, R10 zones to that for single family residential zones. Some of the questions that we kind of need to discuss or need some input from the Planning Commission on is what standards should apply to multifamily projects, and what would be, is it appropriate to have these standards apply to multifamilies as a guideline, and what references need to be included to either a previous site plan approval, or would an application for a building permit be a trigger for a site plan review?
Can I ask some questions? What piece of code are we looking to change? So we're not talking about setbacks in general. We're talking about setbacks of a metal sided building. I don't know where is that? I don't know that.
It's for accessory buildings in
Accessory buildings in general.
in multifamilies.
Okay.
Yeah, because we hammered this a ton on the R18, R10, but I guess we never discussed anything in those.
And at that time, we had a conversation about whether or not to do the hillside protection zones. Those ultimately were rolled in, but the R15, if you remember, doesn't allow accessory buildings right now. And then R2, R3, R4 just weren't, the topic wasn't reached at all. And when you go into those standards now for R2, R3, R4, you can actually build a 15-foot tall building at
3 feet.
3 feet to the property line. Our current standards are 10-foot tall building at 3 to 5 feet away, and then stepping up, 1-to-1 ratio. So it was just a forgotten leftover piece of code. So the recommendation from council was look at ways to bring this into alignment. So we would be stripping out, or the presentation or the proposal is to strip out all of the accessory building standards as they are in R2, R3, R4, and input in the same standards that we use for all of the residential R18 through R12.5 zones, plus RE20, and RE20 has a little bit of its own, but plus HP1 zones. So it would be lot coverage based, and then that setback and height requirement up to 20 feet.
Materials included as well, yeah.
Same standard.
But yet the R15 would still
As
not,
of right now,
there would be no,
R15 is still being left alone, left
Yeah.
as it is.
And can you tell me, is R15 more or less restrictive now?
R15
It does not allow them.
R15 does not allow access. There's maybe an argument to be made the code that it allows like a tough shed, through a land use permit. But as far as R15 goes, if you had the right house on the right size lot and you wanted to do a detached separate garage, right now you're unable to do it.
And I think that's good because R15 is essentially designed to have a uniform look. You start throwing sheds out there, it kind of, people are buying a known quantity there. And then you have a neighbor who puts a shed that changes the uniform look. That's it, to me,
Makes
keeping
sense.
no sheds in R15 makes sense.
And we haven't had any requests yet that I'm familiar with, or we haven't had enough or any of them come forward to the council to ask for an amendment to it. And in this case, we discovered that through a building permit or land use permit, we had, and it's not an issue, it's permissible under those regulations, but it's vastly different than what all the other zones are able to do.
For the zones we're currently looking at, are there a lot of current accessory buildings? Or are there, do we know how many there are and what they look like?
So the R2 zone, the largest chunk of R2 zoning we have is actually mostly, 8 and 10,000 square foot single family homes. And I didn't do inventory of the existing.
But quite a few of those have sheds and things like that.
Okay, Kyler, are you done with your presentation? Yes. Okay. So we actually, this is a public hearing. I appreciate this, some light discussion prior to the public hearing.
Yeah, sorry
Kind of
about
lets
that.
No, I actually think it's good. And I don't know, I could be wrong. I think it kind of gets the public a little bit of insight into maybe how we're thinking and some of the questions we'd ask. But it is the time for the public to provide input on this matter. If they choose to do so. So I'd entertain a motion to open the public hearing. Do we have to have a motion for that?
Only to close it.
Oh,
Right?
okay. I never remember that.
You can just open it.
Then I use the powers vested in me to open, can I get the gavel? To open the public hearing for this matter. Okay, so the public hearing is open. Anyone wishes to express an opinion on this? Everybody on Zoom?
We do have, yes, Stephanie Casey on Zoom.
Great. Go ahead, Ms. Casey.
Hi, Stephanie Casey. I'm North Ogden resident. Can you guys hear me okay?
You can.
Okay. I actually haven't got to look over this, but I'm listening. And so if I understand, you guys are just updating this. I guess the reason I called is I had some concerns with the comments of if there's no sheds, we shouldn't allow sheds. And so I'm just trying to understand the zoning. I get that there's some things that we definitely have to control. We need to make sure that any kind of building on someone's lot, isn't impeding on their neighbors, that it's safe, that the structure, but I'm just wondering, sorry, I'm trying to scan this, but I knew I was the only one on Zoom that maybe make a comment. So I was like, if I don't say something now, I'm going to miss it completely. And then it won't even be worth, can you guys answer that? Help me understand really quick. I know the R5 zone is a higher density. Would any of these be single family homes that you're looking at restricting from allowing a shed, or a different kind of
Scott has an answer here for you, Stephanie.
So there's
case?
there's a pretty good swath of the city that is primarily single family homes that was zoned R2, I believe, as a solution to accessory dwelling units at that time. So by rezoning this area of Old Town and south 2600 North between the area behind Smith's and east to
Gotcha.
700 East or so, there's a pretty good area of the city that was zoned R2. And I think it's because we had requests for that. So that area is currently having the standards for the R2 zone being applied to it, but in reality on the ground, it's much more similar to an R18 area. So it makes,
Gotcha.
in staff's opinion, more sense to have the R18 or the RCC standards be applied to that particular area. We don't have a whole lot of R2 zoning that is proper duplex style developments. We have a couple of those, but most of them are in PRUDs that have their own requirements within the zone that's been written and created. And then there's the R3 and R4 areas like some apartment and townhome projects that are R3 and R4, that for the most part, you might see an accessory structure go up as part of like the lawn mowing and maintenance equipment. But in reality,
Yeah.
Majestic Views townhomes, those folks aren't going to, want to eat up some of their open space requirements to build an accessory building, short of like maybe a mini, some.
For
small-
sure. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, that was just my thinking of, is just making sure that we're setting standards for people's properties, that we're, allowing, that we're not restricting them, more than necessary, especially when it's something that wouldn't be impeding on a neighbor. And that was honestly the thought that went through my head. And I knew that if I didn't raise my hand at that moment, the time would be gone and that would be it. So I figured I'll just speak up and ask. And anyway, so carry on. Thanks. That's my thoughts.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, public hearing's closed. Okay, so now we get the fun part of making a recommendation to the city council on this.
To me, it just makes the most sense, just take the same standards and apply it.
I agree.
We spent a lot of time
Yeah.
working through those standards, so.
A lot of
I
time.
also agree. I mean, the only consideration would be, is there something to a multifamily zone that would be inherently different for setbacks, and I don't see it.
Yeah.
But, I wonder, well, in a multifamily zone, are they naturally, giving up that, what are we doing with setbacks? It's to create a feeling of open space. So are they naturally sacrificing open space in these higher density multifamily zones? And I mean, I think they've already accepted living closer to their neighbors, right? I mean, or the potential to, I don't think necessarily we need to change setbacks for that.
They may not have any room for setback.
Other thoughts? I'd entertain a motion to make a recommendation to the city council on this.
Just reading the recommendation, it sounds like you just want some direction on preparing an ordinance for the city council.
Yeah, so it'd be a recommendation to approve the information as presented to align the accessory building standards across single family and multifamily zones. Something like that should get us, I think, enough direction. And we left it open. We didn't bring an ordinance for this one or the next one because we figured there'd be some discussion that might have driven the direction that ordinance goes. And then, but if not, we won't belabor it and we'll take it forward to council.
Well, I'll make a motion that that the accessory building ordinance in the R2, R3, and R4 zone be rewritten to be in alignment with the R18, R110 zones and other zones within the city, R1 or the R5 zone, so R15 or R5, R15 zone remain as it is. And that ordinance be prepared for consideration by the city council. Does that cover it?
Yep.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Any alterations to the motion?
I just want to clarify one thing. Essentially, in lay terms, that means R15, the R5 is going to stay out. The rest of them, the table's going to get pulled over, and that's pretty much it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, personally, I like that. And then if we do decide, because I mean, we have these zone differences for a reason, right? They're different zones for a reason, and they can be more granular in different zones. I'm not seeing any reason to make it any different that jumps off the page at me. And so I like the idea of bringing it in, and then as individual applications come and they say, hey, you know what, I need this thing here, and look, this is how this neighborhood stacked up in this R4 zone, then I think that can be addressed at that time. But I like that it seems like in the best public interest to bring this in line right now than to leave it out. And I think it was probably just an omission. That's my thought.
To me, it validates the good work that staff did to think through an ordinance change that can be applied to something we didn't consider before. I think it's excellent.
Okay, well, you guys are super agreeable this evening. So let's have a vote here, starting with Commissioner Webb,
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes,
Commissioner Nancaro,
Yes.
and I'm a yes, the motion passes. Okay, well, that brings us to item number 7 already, which is another public hearing and consideration and another recommendation on a legislative amendment to develop short-term rental regulations from Scott Hess. Scott, could we call a 2-minute recess while I have some business in the hall real quick? Thank you. So we're gonna take just a brief pause. Thanks. We need to vote on that? I came right from work.
we're gonna need a key.
No wafers. Haven't had those in some time. I don't want my grandma used to make the pudding banana. Yeah, with the wafers in it. My dad would always eat them growing up. Yeah, there's something nice and basic. Yeah, very simple flavor.
Okay. The break, let's go ahead and resume. Is everybody good to resume?
Yep.
Okay. Be much more focused on the remaining agenda. So we introduced this already. It's a consideration, the recommendation for short-term rentals from Scott Hess. Thanks, Scott.
So this is a consideration of short-term rentals. If you notice, the applicable ordinance is related to accessory dwelling units. That is one area of our code specifically that calls out short-term renting. Otherwise, short-term rentals are regulated through our business license section of our code, which is in the land use section of the code. And we require just a standard business license as we would any long-term rental. Just for a quick piece of background, these have been considered back in 2018 and 2019. In 2019, the code was updated to allow short-term renting of an accessory dwelling unit. Somebody had constructed one or was under construction of one and went to apply for a license, realizing that they had built this whole idea of their ADU on being able to short-term rent it, monetize their property. And at that time, the council elected to permit folks to do that. They were homeowner occupied and they were going to rent out some portion of their home or their basement accessory dwelling unit. The options right now for folks in the city are for someone to rent out as an Airbnb or short-term rental their entire property, any number of rooms within their property if they live there, or a separate standalone accessory dwelling unit. So you could have like a backyard apartment or an above the garage apartment or something like that if you're renting out as a short-term rental. You can't do the mix and match of I'm going to long-term rent my upstairs and short-term rent my basement. Basically, you can't double dip on a property, but you can select one of those options, short-term or long-term rental, and then, pick and choose among your house how you want to do that. Short-term rentals, I have done a bunch of research about this, and I've watched what other communities in the state, really nationally, are doing with them. And they do have a potential, to affect underlying housing affordability. Investors can come in and purchase your less expensive housing stock. They know that they can make a killing on short-term rentals depending on your, access to open space or access to other amenities within and around your community, and monetize those uses and essentially pull units away from people who might be first-time home buyers. So kind of interested in how this affects North Ogden. We have about 6,000 single-family residential water connections in the city. We have 10 active short-term rental business licenses, so 10 of 6,000. And I know that doesn't capture all of them because a lot of people do this. They don't realize that it's a permitting process. So just looking out into August and into September, there's somewhere between 20 and like 35 available short-term rentals at any time that I can see without going too far out. So my guess is that we have 10 permitted, maybe we have 100 or something, total, like if you were to extend that out for those who are currently rented, so they're not showing up on an Airbnb website as an available rental. But it's certainly not, in my opinion, it's not affecting underlying housing affordability. We're not hearing that people are unable to buy a house because they're competing with companies coming in and purchasing up multiples of these types of housing units and then renting them out on a short-term rental basis.
Can I rebut that?
Well, you can, and I'll just say that as you rebut that my opinion is different than the former planning director's on this. The former planning director, when I read his staff report, was basically that these can have impacts on the cities, and he was not for permitting the accessory dwelling units to be short-term rented when I read his staff report initially. I don't know if his opinion changed between planning commission and city council, but it's one of those, it's a professional judgment thing, and it's a bit of an opinion thing, and the empirical, information, at least from our current business licenses, show that, in my opinion, it's not having this massive effect on our housing market, at least from our thought. But
Well, rebuttal was the wrong word, because that would imply I have evidence to the contrary, and I don't. So all I was going to say is that I believe that it's not impacting housing affordability now.
Yeah.
But what is the planning commission plans for the future? So will the decisions made here affect housing affordability into the future? And that's just an open question, because like I said, I don't have evidence. So
absolutely. And I think that that's a good question to ask yourself as the city grows. Do we want to be in a position of attempting to stop them now, or in a position of seeing if there's an impact in the future and then closing the door on them? So you can have a few different ways of doing this. But
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was wondering, because you watch this going up in Ogden Valley and have Quinn decide whether they're just doing it because they don't want people doing it, or there's too many doing it, or the impact of the home.
I believe that.
I
if
can't remember.
you're in Ogden Valley, you're Huntsville, or you're Springdale, you're Park City, you're Heber Valley,
There's a
your
lot.
impacts are much different
Yeah.
than North
Yeah.
Ogden City. I mean,
Yeah.
the people who are renting Airbnbs here are doing it because you can rent a home in a neighborhood that might be close to your family. You've moved out of
Mhm.
state, instead of renting or being in a hotel in downtown Ogden. You can actually be in the community. You're coming and you're visiting. We're a destination community for people who live here. We're not a destination community for people to be like a jumping off point for access to national parks or even really the ski resorts. I mean, to some degree, North Ogden Divide Road, but this impacts Ogden City much more than us. And the cities that are really regulating this down are those the communities that are highly amenitized real near them, like Springdale with access to Zion. I mean, that
Springdale,
in that
Moab.
city,
Mhm.
Yeah,
they
even
saw-
St. George.
yeah, they saw over a few years, whole swaths of housing stock being purchased up by, companies who were then short-term renting it, and that impacts neighborhood feel and, community investment and all sorts of things that that we,
That's why I saw it on the ground, they're concerned why it was due to the impact of the community itself, because the fact that people come in to parties and late nights and
the second homeowner syndrome of
Mhm.
communities in Park City has a lot of that, like vast neighborhoods that are just dark most of the time, and then they are lit up for events and then.
Yeah, my thought is if we had a significant change in the city, say we had a gondola, or even if we had a Marriott that went into, by the pass, or if some event triggered, or looked like it was going to trigger some discussion, then I think it would make sense to look at that proactively. I don't think we should wait until something like that settles. I think that should be a triggering event to say, oh, the tone has changed about a gondola. We need to look at these short-term rentals now before it's a problem.
We're jumping the gun on the discussion, which I by and large think is
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay, but but I would say, let's say I don't like the idea of, hey, there's negative impact, but it's only 10 houses. Because what does that do for the neighbors of the 10 houses? Right? Do you see what I'm saying? So if we're saying, hey, these things have negative impact to neighbors, then.
Well,
We're not saying.
And I'm
that.
not-
because it's
I'm
No,
not
I think
saying
we're
red,
saying,
doesn't mean
I think
that-
we're saying that they don't have negative impact to neighbors.
My opinion, my discussion with code enforcement, police department, fire department is that these have been pretty minimally impacting. And that the few party houses that we've had pop up have been shut down pretty quickly, typically by complaints that happen and then they're shut down on that renter that night. It's not like a recurring issue that we're dealing with. The complaints that I've received lately have been from one particular homeowner, and the main complaint is that he doesn't like the transient nature of this use in his neighborhood. That I grew, he for 20 years he knew his neighbor, and now he doesn't know who's ever in that house 3 or 4 doors down. And that's the changing nature of neighborhoods in some ways. But I asked him if is garbage an issue, is parking an issue, where it's light, sound, noise, any of these things that we could try to regulate. He said, no, I mean, it really came down to he didn't know who was driving up and down the street. And I don't see that as an impact that we can really regulate. And I think that just knowing the size of our city, we're like a big little town, or we're a small, we're like a small big city. We're somewhere in this weird suburban urban fringe that to me, to staff and my recommendation, make more sense to make these permissible and safe and have regulations for review annually on them than to attempt to, by complaint, shut them down and have them happening illegally in the city anyways and not have any business license revenues and or ability to at least look and make sure that the fire life safety for the areas that renting are permissible. So if the commission believes that the city has the political will to shut these down or cap them or limit them, or you can do lottery systems, you can do homeowner only requirements like more of a bed and breakfast. So you have to be on site, or if you're not on site, you have to have somebody there in 24 hours and, or like a 1 hour call person. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff we can write. You can codify anything you want. I don't know what the enforcement on that will be. And so I'm trying to be practical in what I think we could actually enforce while attempting to mitigate those impacts that come up.
I'll be sharing my thoughts during our
And
discussion.
that's basically it. I've got a list. We can go through my list of the short-term rental regulations. They're almost like right out of the ADU ordinance. So when you build an accessory dwelling unit, you're required to get a fire code review and a building code review. All the bedrooms that you build as an ADU have to meet your ingress, egress, window standards to include your old 1970s houses. This is one of the triggers. It's like a +1 land use where you can require somebody to cut their foundation and do a new window well so you can get out of the basement, as opposed to if you just own an old home and you've got your kids in the basement, we can't force you to bring that home up to current building code. That's, unless there's like a triggering event, and turning it into a monetized short-term rental is one of those triggering events that hasn't been stripped away by state legislature and what we can and can't do yet. So that's my current recommendation. I'm happy to have a conversation about it. And this is your guys' community. And so you all decide makes the most sense for you, and I'm happy to write up any ordinance you want. And I assumed that this one wasn't likely a one and done at this meeting, that we'd have a conversation about it, and I would bring you back some revised language, was my assumption.
Cool.
Thank you. Excellent points, by the way.
I'd be interested to hear in the public hearing if there are any comments.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing, get public's thought on short-term rentals, what legislation around those would need to look like. So the public hearing's open.
I'm Sandy Cochran. I'm a North Ogden resident, and I would like to voice my opposition to allowing short-term rentals in multifamily dwellings. I live at Prominence Point, and we currently have 2 Airbnbs within a 30-second walking distance of my home. And I just foresee it becoming a problem. Some of the homes are, you can have 2 townhouses where you can stand and touch both front doors without moving. And that's, if you're living over here and you've got small children, the thought of strangers right on the other side of the wall, right next door, you know, a different stranger every night for 3, however many nights, is very unsettling. And if you've saved your money and purchased that home, I just don't think it's fair for you to have to live there and feel uncomfortable. And then the issue of us not knowing, because I had to do research to find out that these 2 units were Airbnbs. There was the owners didn't come in and notify us. Our community doesn't have a limit on the number of units that can be purchased to rent. And our HOA management company has told me this is the first area like this that he's seen that did not have a limit on the number of rentals that could be purchased. So the idea of not knowing who's there, we've had broad daylight people breaking into homes in our community. When we see strange people walking around, we don't know. Do they belong there? Are they renting one of these places, or are they here? Because I've actually confronted young men walking in the community that had no business there. And I've walked right up to them and said, what are you doing? You're making people nervous. Why are you here? And you know, instantly it was obvious what they were doing, because one of them said they lived there. The other one said, no, they didn't. And as soon as I was done talking to them, they took off. So that's another issue. And then we're going to hopefully eventually have amenities in our community. We've been waiting 2.5 years, but when we do, how are we going to be sharing those amenities with these strangers? And I just, you know, if these 2 are allowed to stay and there's no limit to the number of units that can, and a lot of people are selling now because they're seeing how much, you know, they paid for their unit and how much they can get now. A lot of people are listing them to make that extra money. I just worry that we're going to get more and more in there. And I won't be happy with it. I won't feel comfortable. And I just hope you'll consider those things when you.
I have a question.
You can, and I have a question also. Go ahead.
Does your HOA CCNRs limit Airbnb or short-term renting?
No,
Okay.
we were misled on a lot of things though. You know, Jack Barrett was the developer and he's not there anymore. When I purchased, I was told there was a limit to the number of units that could be purchased and not owner occupied. And that was not true. So.
Okay. So, ma'am, I thought your opening statement was support. You made some great points, in my opinion. And your opening statement was well received by me, which was, I'm opposed to short-term rentals in multifamily residential units, or sorry, multifamily zones. Would you consider that you're also opposed for the city at large, or just in the multifamily zones?
You know, I haven't given a lot of thought to, like, single-family homes. I don't think it would impact those. I don't know, though. I'm not one of those neighbors, but I wouldn't think
I was just curious.
it
if you
would
had an
have the
opinion
same impact.
there. Okay.
They could still feel uncomfortable having, strangers all the time.
Duly noted. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a question. I'm not finding it now, but when I was reviewing your draft language, it looked like some stuff from different cities, kind of put together, but it seemed like in two different areas, it specifically addressed prohibiting it in multifamily dwellings. I can't find it right now, but it seems like I did read
Yeah,
that
we
in
can-
there.
Well, these are the things we'd be discussing. this evening.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the kinds of things you could.
I was
throw in
looking
there.
for that language that you had because I remember seeing it in there in two different portions.
Yeah, I can also see how,
I remind, we're still in public hearing.
Oh, yeah.
Let's,
Yep.
let's hold our discussion
Yep.
before, and let me get the public an opportunity to speak. Sorry to cut you off there.
No,
one wants
you're
to
right.
speak.
You're right. I'm jumping the
Is,
gun
is,
there.
is there any sort of ordinance written now for the city? It's just
Nope, it's just permitted
to
by,
be developed.
just permitted by a business license.
John, anybody on Zoom with a hand up?
No.
Okay,
I move we close the public hearing then.
I'll second it.
motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we thank the public for their comments on that. Go ahead. So Johnson, you were.
I can see, on the affordability issue, I can see how in our community, multifamily units, especially the ones that would be turning over, that could have an impact on affordability,
Yes.
because
Absolutely.
that would be another factor of people coming in and driving up prices. And we're not a community that has, like the old Park West area where you have a lot of, condos and things like that, where they are seasonal rentals where there's less, or even by like Wolf Creek area, the old Patio Springs area, where you have those and that's kind of built into the nature of the community. And so I could see an affordability issue there, that tying those two together. to
I
me
think
kind
also
of
we
makes
pointed out
sense.
that, like, we talk a lot about, hey, people want to monetize their property. Corporations want to monetize property, right? So,
Yeah.
Hey, we have 10 now. How quickly could a company with deep pockets come in and swoop up a whole bunch of new construction in the village of Providence Point, right?
Yeah.
They could buy up 75% of them,
Companies do that.
right? So.
Based on that, I have real questions about allowing Airbnbs specifically in the multifamily zone. I think that's a potential issue that we ought to consider discussing and potentially regulating.
Because then you could essentially just have that's a hotel at that point.
Yeah,
Without a management company on site.
and I think it
So-
potentially runs into some real affordability issues just based on where we're at right now.
I mean, that was I think a lot of the discussion when we looked at, the different townhouse developments and, different recent developments in the city was this whole concept of affordable housing. So I absolutely agree. And I recall when I was reviewing your draft language, that it did point out in two different areas that it would not be permitted in multifamily dwellings.
Whereas
Yeah.
based on the nature of our community, in the single family residence, you have just a lot more variety. You have people who are aging in our community and have a mother-in-law that's already in their house and they're on a fixed income. And to me, it makes sense for them to have wide use potentially. Like if they're like, I don't want to rent this out all the time, but I don't mind renting this out at Christmas time or in the summer. I need the money and, I just don't want to have a renter there all year round. And I don't know that
I'm
has
a
quite
big
the
fan,
impact.
though, on this. This is just Brandon's opinion. You guys don't need to share this with me, and staff doesn't need to share this. But I'm going to be an owner-occupied situation. And I rented a hotel, or I rented a condo one time, on vacation. And it was Hawaii, it was the greatest thing ever. And then about 3 days later, in the room next door came these wild party people.
Yeah.
And they were so loud, I couldn't get a lick of sleep, like paper thin walls. And I had a front desk I could at least call and say, get these kids out of here, I mean, I could have called the police, right?
Yeah.
But I had someone to call, and that was the front desk. So let's say we're in a situation where you're renting out and there's a bonfire in the backyard, even if it's not a multifamily zone. It's when one of our, I don't think anyone
Next
here lives in
door.
ones, yeah. Okay, so there's wild people, there's, music blaring at 3 o'clock in the morning and smoke coming out of the house and whatever, you want to have someone to call. So I like having an owner occupied in it because you don't have a front desk to call when it's some company that's rented this out. And not only that, anyway.
It does avoid a lot of the problems.
It does, because
Where-
it self-regulates.
Whether it's an ADU or an Airbnb or things like that, it avoids a lot of problems.
Even an owner occupied could create issues if you can't get a hold of the owner, or you don't have the owner's phone number.
Yeah. But at least,
But you still have the city you can get a hold of.
but at least that owner still has to, at some point.
Has
So
to
my
deal with it.
mom and dad live in Pleasant View, and they're next door neighbor moved, and this new guy bought the house. He said, hey, we're gonna rent the basement. And he's renting the basement, and that's fine. I understand that my parents hate it, but at least he had to come over and introduce himself to my parents and say, hey, would you guys go down to the planning commission and support this? My mom and dad said no, but there's at least a face there at some point, where if this is non-owner occupied, I think we could set up a situation where a corporation, potentially an out-of-state corporation, that makes it seem more evil to you guys in trying to sell this, sweeps in and creates some of these and rents them out, and the homeowner next door has no recourse really in what's going on there. Not that I have a lot of recourse for what my neighbors do anyway, but the homeowner, my neighbors behave themselves a little bit just because I know them.
Well, what we're currently not doing as a city is, per the research that staff did, is we do quote unquote require a business license, yet you can go out on the Airbnb website and see that there's a mismatch in the number. And
Yeah,
at
people are
least we
doing
can
this anyway,
research
yeah.
that, right?
That
Like,
would be
it's
well
gonna be,
received, yeah.
it's hard to enforce those things. It would be
Mhm.
cost prohibitive for us to tie staff's hands to try to enforce this. That being said, just based on the nature of what that is, that they can go out and research that and kind of see and validate those things, third party, it's helpful. It creates data. It informs us on what to do.
Those ordinances give you a code enforcement backbone to lean on, is
Yeah.
what they do. But short-term rental, by the time you get to, code enforcement's gonna send you a certified mail letter, and then you're gonna have a week to respond, and then you have 2 weeks to come into compliance, and then you're gonna get a hearing date. You've had 5 short-term renters in there by that time. Like, the issue needs to be handled in that moment. And so if you have a bonfire going on, call non-emergency and/or emergency police and have them come and knock that door right then. And if we want to have standards that require, as part of your business license, somebody who can be called and get to that home within 1 hour, whether that's a homeowner, the actual landowner, or a designated maintenance person, whatever manager, those are ordinances that people will put in as well. And then you have the contact information, somebody who can actually physically get there. And if you're an out-of-state renter, you're a Hill Air Force Base Air Force person, man or woman, I was gonna say airman, and you go on an 18-month leave, and you realize that your house is now your greatest asset after the last 18 months of ramp up values. You might elect to monetize that house for the next 18 months while you're gone, and you have a management company utilize it, and then move back into your home when you're off assignment. And we see
That's a
that.
good example.
Yeah, and there's no guarantee that those corporations won't still buy those homes in long-term rental.
Yeah.
And it's anything we put in the ordinance is at our, we have to prove that you are not owner occupied. We have to prove that you weren't occupying the home for 6 months plus 1 day, or whatever the thing is we put in the ordinance.
Or couldn't we have an ordinance that said it has to be an accessory dwelling? You can rent out your accessory, but you can't rent out your primary home. Couldn't that be in there?
What's the difference?
Yeah, exactly.
In my opinion.
If you say owner occupied, it covers it both ways.
Yeah, in my opinion, that when the homeowner's on site, he has.
But owner occupied doesn't mean the owner is on site. By state code, it means that they occupy the house for a certain number of days a year.
Yeah.
So owner occupied means it's my primary residence, which is usually 181 days, or it's like whatever number of days per year. But they're probably gone.
I like that someone could show up in an hour. I think
Yeah.
that's a great,
Is
Yeah.
that what you're
Right,
trying to
Bill.
get at though, Commissioner Mason, that they could only rent it if they were residing on site?
Correct. Correct. You go ahead and rent out the second, you want to build an addition to your home and rent that, that's fine. But to short-term rental your entire property, I'm opposed to this and it has to do with, and it's fine if we're not, we don't see eye to eye.
No.
And it's fine if I don't see eye to eye with Scott, I still respect the heck out of it, okay? But you respect the heck out of yourself? I knew that. But my neighbor is wealthy and he owns 39 properties. 39 properties, that's 39 families that aren't able to buy their own homes. And he's sitting back there getting rich and 39 homes. I'm opposed to somebody monetizing their property at the expense of the 25-year-old kid that has a little baby and would like to live part of the American dream.
Can I just say though,
Please.
that could be 30, I mean, I owned a rental and I kept it really nice, in my own opinion, but that could be 39 individual homeowners who own a second home and rent it. Like, there's no guarantee that by him offloading his investment properties, that they end up in the hands of
Yeah.
anybody other than someone else who might run it as an investment. And so I agree
I
that
agree, yeah.
you're pulling some inventory off, but what if he sold one of those and another buyer buys it and they duplex it? I mean, there's no guarantee that any of those homes would be affordable housing.
Yeah, no, yeah, so I was gonna say, there's nothing that says that those homes are the homes that a 25-year-old could even afford if
Yeah.
he were to sell them. Like,
It's also
There's
why,
mar- yeah.
there's 25 homes that are not owned by homeowners that are going into and I love my neighbor, to death. He's a great person.
sure.
And he's a giving person and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
Isn't that the beauty of the country we live in and
Yeah.
the way we can?
To some extent.
I would disagree with you on that point. I think that's a market force that's very tough to regulate. And it's actually not even the issue at hand here. The issue at hand is for short-term rentals, do we want an owner occupied and what is the definition of that? Or do we want other regulations? And specifically, I like what Scott brought up with like someone being there within the hour, I think it's I would love for someone to live on site.
Mhm.
That, to me, that's the ideal. But the more I kind of contemplate that issue, the more last time we kind of talked about this issue, there were a couple of things that were brought up as far as like, well, it's owner occupied at first, but then someone buys it. And then how does the city kind of track that down? I think Eric was the one bringing that up and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But if we start to have some forward thought about specifically a short-term rental, someone has got to get there within the hour. We have to have a contact name. That saves the city a lot of resources because then at least if the police show up, they have an ordinance. And if they don't have that, then they have a specific thing they can follow up on and say, hey, we can track down the owner of the house.
Right.
You have to give us a contact that can show up in an hour. And it gives the police a mechanism of enforcement that continues to give us data on an evolving issue that doesn't affect our community in the same way it affects resort communities right now. But if we had a gondola, we would start to transition that direction.
Yeah, for sure.
That was a very compelling argument. I'm still a no.
Yeah.
But
That's good. It's good to have the
You know,
no's.
I really liked some of the language that you had in this draft ordinance. So I don't know if you want us to sort of pick that apart, but specifically some things that we've talked about that were in there is, all the contact requirements, that there has to be somebody there within 24 hours. I think it was, one of them was like a representative of some sort. So whether it's like,
24 or 1
their
hour.
relative or their,
Within 1 hour.
I'm sorry, within 1 hour. And then you also had some violations and penalties with fines and things like that.
50 a day for the
Yeah, that
example.
was,
Hurricane. or-
that sort of compels compliance in a way, I think specifically, I really respect the comments from Mrs. Corcoran that it would be very unsettling in the townhouse or the condo next door. That would be very unsettling. So I think definitely that I would say no not permitted in multifamily dwellings. I don't know how you guys feel.
I think I agree with that too, but how is that any less unsettling if there's,
Well,
10 feet a yard?
You know, here's the thing, I think, well, conceptually, how do I feel about this? Would I want it next door to my house? Probably not, but in theory, I could probably live with it because it's, it's not like the front door is right next door and the
Just the
walls
walls,
there's
just the
strangers
walls
coming in and
separating
out,
out.
and I have small children and stuff, that would, where if it's next door, I mean, I don't know what the neighbor's doing 30 feet away or whatever anyway, I guess, unless it's a parking issue or a noise issue or the bonfire or something like that, if it becomes a problem, then I guess you call the police and then there's
Some of
kind
us have that
enforcement
anyway with people that
occurs,
just live next door, so.
Yeah, you have one next door?
Bonfire folk.
I don't have an Airbnb, sometimes have the problems that.
Oh,
Where do you have a
yeah,
bonfire?
yeah.
You have bonfire.
Whether they, so. But I just think in sort of a like closed townhouses or something, I'm just
It
gonna.
amplifies the problem.
It really, it would be,
I can see that, yeah.
I don't think it
It would be a
precludes
problem.
us from regulating single-family dwellings in the future,
Mhm.
but it does seem like we're getting to a point that in multifamily dwellings,
Yeah.
we're gonna say no.
yeah.
So Scott, what are you looking for tonight? Are you looking for a firm recommendation or are you looking for guidance? like
Those
you're
are,
hearing?
those are super helpful. I mean, so I'll bring you back language on someone to be at the property with 1 hour, a dedicated phone number for complaints, and a person, whether that's manager, property owner, or whatever, will get some
You
language.
have a comment? You know what? We have a police officer here.
Oh, yeah,
Will you
yeah.
ask the public comment?
Yeah, perfect.
Sir, I'm gonna ask you to come to the pulpit and,
It's recorded. Will you speak in the microphone?
okay, so just for the public record, we actually are outside of our public hearing. I'm gonna consider you a expert witness.
Not at all. So,
Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Like John Ungard, officer, investigator for North Ogden, officer for almost 11 years now, in a couple agencies. The thing I heard you guys talking about, someone responding within an hour. So if it's a management company, you know how hard it is to reach a management company on a Friday night, or even on a Tuesday night after 6 p.m. If it's a homeowner that's renting the place out, what do they say? Oh, I'm not in the area. I was camping for the weekend. So
Yep.
you have the hour time limit you guys are stating, but what's going to be the repercussions
Yeah.
of that? Like I said, it's we talked about, we could track it in the law enforcement side, 100%. Between dispatch calls or whatever, even if we don't actually do a full report, it's actually logged into a dispatch call.
Yeah.
But the same point is, it's ongoing thing. The code enforcement works investigations. And I see we have the 2 code enforcement ladies and they're quite busy. They're going around and a lot of times it's when people are calling, they're going to these homes with these beat up cars. And like I said, they send the notice in and you have so many days to respond and you have so many days to clean it up. I completely agree when I live if you live in a townhome, yeah, it would be annoying. Having these people come.
Let me ask you this. Do you see any increase in police activity in a short-term rental versus any other type of dwelling?
Not at all. I see it. It's gonna be the same regardless if it's a single family home in a regular neighborhood or in a townhome community. Because we see it in both aspects.
True, at least if a problem person moves in a short-term rental, they're gone in 4 or 5 days. If they move in next door to you, you're stuck with them for quite a while.
So.
Okay.
And a lot of times the thing is, if it's an Airbnb or short-term rental, it's if there's a contract, yeah, it's a 6-month lease, but then they still have the avenues with a 3-day pay or evict notice, then the eviction process in the county and everything. So even if it's only a short-term rental, you can solve some issues, especially if it's, don't like using the word dirtbag renters, but they're out there. They're definitely out there and, or you have the renters that have multi-families in one rental.
Yeah.
So which we see 2, 3 families within one rental, then it's, then the parking situations, the beat up cars, everything. So like I said, that was just my 2 cents, it's I've been homeowner for years.
Yeah.
I love my neighborhood, and I actually, behind my home, I do have a set of townhomes and condos. I live in Davis County. And it's, every now and then we do get these people that live in these townhomes that do act up. And, you know, I've lived in this house for 24 years now. So, but, and I think with the market now, if we're talking about investors coming and buying it, I think the market, the way it's going, you know, it's kind of flipping into a buyer's market now. But I've seen, my brother-in-law sold his house 2 months ago. He got 400,000 on his house. The realtors can't sell it now. They've dropped the price over 70,000 in 2.5 weeks because there's no buyers out here for that market. So I don't see the investors really coming out here. That's until the market changes again. You know, you look at all the news reports of construction companies, you know, they're slowing down on construction, especially down in North Carolina, stuff like that.
Senator, thank you for your comments.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
You know, on page, I don't know if you guys are looking at the same thing, it's on the bottom, it's marked page 30. And it is, let me see, it's going to be like, trying to find like which item it is, but it's starting like item E, occupancy during rental period. Specifically addressing things like property shall not be rented to more than one party at any given time. You know, it's talking about urgent response. The owner or designated representative shall be available to immediately respond 24 hours a day, 365 days a year by telephone. When necessary, the owner or designated representative to be able to physically respond within 1 hour of an inquiry or request by the city. If they're unreachable after 3 attempts, then citations or penalties or whatever start to. So there's like a nameplate sign that has contact information. There's some very specific things in here that I think when I was reading it earlier, I thought, hey, if all these rules are in place. I guess the issue is, you know, right now, you know, of 10 that you've given permits to, but how many are out there, you know, that,
Yeah, and
that,
if we make the rules really onerous, the people just won't get a business license and
Yeah.
they'll do it anyways because we don't have the staff to go out and track.
Right.
I may have missed this, maybe you have mentioned, if the owner can't be, the owner be contacted, but they're gone somewhere for the weekend, so they can't be there. Is it set up as an emergency contact that the owner can have you contact them that would be around?
Well, right now, it's just whoever's on the business license. By ordinance, we can write whatever we want, but there needs to be a secondary contact, or if they can't be contacted and they won't kick out these renters, then it's just a fine is assessed and you get it straight to citation, which then they could fight through the court system and attempt to
Right.
prove that they were unavailable or did respond or whatever, you know, they can
Right,
have their day in court.
I guess before you may run out of time, the owner can't come. They're not there, but there may have a secondary contact, you can contact, which it can be there.
Well, I like the idea of legitimizing it in a way, but I also like the idea of putting some very tight controls
I
on
do
it, like
too.
owner occupied. So
Yeah.
that's the way I'm gonna vote when this
I agree.
finally comes up. Your point's well made, Commissioner Webb, that, hey, look, this is gonna happen anyway. The first time I ever used a service like this, my mother-in-law rented this big cabin up in Heber City. And you pulled in and the sign, first thing you see was a sign the owner had left. Hey, we're not supposed to rent this out. So we didn't know this, you can rent it on the internet, you know, and then, so if everyone could just park around the corner and, you know, there was like these like
Oh, yeah.
weird things, and we were like, oh, great. You know?
Did you
So-
leave?
No, of course not. Like you booked your vacation, like.
Did you think you were a good renter?
What's that?
Did you think you were a good renter?
I don't know. We had like 75 children there. Like it couldn't have been a good, it was a cabin, it was a different situation. But
It's one of those interesting things though.
Yeah.
Like you've now talked about, you illegally rented an Airbnb.
no,
You legally rented an Airbnb that couldn't legally rent something.
Okay.
Anyways,
You
occupied
stayed
an
in an
Airbnb. You occupied an Airbnb that shouldn't have been there. And
I can confess to a
I'm
lot
not-
of
I'm-
crimes.
So
and
now
then
we
the
want
other-
restrictions.
I'm the worst at this, just talk to the police chief. But the other is you stayed in an Airbnb that was a townhome situation and your complaint wasn't about your stay, it was about your neighbor's stay.
Correct. But I had
But you stayed there. And so it's like.
When I respected you.
It's
I'd like to amend the record.
I
Maybe the
like
people
to
you
think-
didn't like thought the same
like,
thing about you.
Yeah, I like to think that I'm a pretty good guest at an Airbnb, and I've used them. I've stayed in them. I think oftentimes they go completely unnoticed. I don't know the people. I've lived in my house for a year now, and other than the few people that we interact with on a regular basis who have kids similar age as me, I don't know people's cars. I don't know who's coming and going, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 houses down the street. And they could be short-term rentals for all I know, and I don't notice. And I think that the complaints are often not as bad as the reality of these things. And when one complaint does happen, it's really bad in that particular moment, but I don't know. The other is just on the multifamily thing. One is they were permitted at one time, so we cannot strip those licenses. And the question then comes, meaning that like in the Village of Prominence Point, if they were permissible and then we changed the rules, they got theirs. The way land use law in Utah works, you get the letter of the law the day you apply. And those licenses would have to amortize themselves out. They would have to go away for over a year before we could prove that we can't reissue that license.
That's assuming they
so-
got a license.
And that's assuming they got a license. So if they are licensed, which that would be, if they are called and they're checked and they're not licensed, that's easy. We can try to attempt to shut them down and, force them. But the other is, what happens with those licenses? Are they required to just amortize out? Do they run with the land? If they sell to somebody who immediately applies for that business license, if they put their name in an LLC and then they run it, so the LLC changes hands by owner, but the LLC stays the same name, like does it continue to run? And those are like nitpicky little things, but they're questions that I ask because they would become very valuable licenses, potentially driving up the cost of that particular unit that has a license for an Airbnb through the roof. And I experienced that on the Oregon coast and coastal communities that had a cap and they were permitted up into a certain date in like 2019, and then they were eliminated. And you had one home would sell for $350,000 and one for $700,000 because the person could make their money back in a short amount of time on that during the vacation season. So you have these like haves and have-nots because the licenses ran with the land, or if you bought the home, you bought the license. You got one of those coveted few licenses. So
Doesn't it work, like, okay, you're grandfathered in, but then if you sell that house to somebody else, I guess if it was protected under an LLC or something like that, but if you sold that house, does the permit isn't the permit for the person, not for the dwelling?
it depends on how it's sold and ownership is transferred. For the most part, yeah, if you're X homeowner and you sell the Y homeowner and you can't show that like it continues. But if it's a business license in good standing, we would be in the driver's seat of proving that it was not in effect for over a year and therefore should be canceled.
Yeah.
And I think we're probably not going to run into that a lot, but it's just something to think about.
Well, to me, for multifamily, that's an argument for putting something in stone now.
Yeah.
And then, let's say we do end up with we got 10 that are licensed. Let's say 2 of them are in multifamily, and then we have to figure out how to address 2 of those over the next number of years.
Right.
But to me, I think that highlights the urgency specifically for multifamily.
Yeah.
That we need to put something in place sooner rather than later.
That's a really
At least.
good example.
And are they not permitted in all multifamily? Or what about like we have some of the duplex homes, we have a handful of neighborhoods duplex, so any attached dwelling unit, you don't want them approved in? Or is a duplex situation okay, short-term rent 1?
I just think that any multifamily,
Any attached?
I think with the
I think any
exception of
multifamily,
accessory dwelling unit. Do you agree? Accessory dwelling unit, which would be a 2-family home, right?
Well, they're different.
Okay.
They're inherently different. When I say attached, it's like shared wall construction, that would be
A
the
duplex.
duplexes that each stand alone on their own piece of property or that are, shared wall. That's different. And I guess if you were the owner of both and and you short-term rented the other one and you owned and lived in one side, they could make an argument that it's an ADU, but again, we're kind of making up scenarios for somebody to figure out.
I mean, you might have to look at
Yeah.
R2 and decide what you're gonna do there,
Mhm.
you know, specifically. But I think for any multifamily shared wall stuff, duplex or whatever, my recommendation would be consider a no.
Yeah.
I think
I would be a hard no on that.
Or would you-
I'm so everyone's clear where I'm at, and this doesn't mean, I think you're all bad people. I
No,
mean,
we don't
I
have
think
to
you're
agree.
marginally
That's
bad
why
people.
there's 9 of us, you know.
So, no,
Set
but
it up, yeah.
I'm going to, I remain opposed to short-term rentals unless the homeowner lives on the property with them, and I understand the complexities of that. So.
I'm buying into that more and more all the
Okay,
time.
I understand I understand and to some extent agree with the principle of, hey, what we can control, we can control, and let's legitimize these and things, and I understand that, but I think this is gonna be salesmanship, okay, but 100% of the public comments we heard were pretty passionately against, this gives me fear, this is something I do not want, this could affect my property values and all sorts of stuff. Okay, now it was 1 of 1, it's a very small sample size, okay? But the points were well made, and I think I think that philosophy is very much into our community. I have a hard time going and tell my neighbors, yeah, I supported short-term rentals, because I don't think most people do. And so,
You've sold me.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
well, I wasn't trying to. really.
You did. You sold me.
actually, you think about the pros and cons, like what do we benefit as a community from short-term rentals?
Well, we should be receiving transient room tax.
Should be.
We should be receiving it. And those taxes should be collected and assessed by the Airbnbs of the world and then paid back to local communities, but that's on us to make sure that we're receiving that. I mean,
But
We're
right now we
unlikely-
have 10
Right.
out of 6,000.
so again, though, if the real number is like 100 or 150 and we can drive compliance, then you get to some degree business license revenue. You get assurance that they're safe units because you review them, and then you get transient room tax and you legalize something that's happening in your community. So to me, the idea, and while it might be that we don't allow them in multifamily, we do require owner occupied, but it's to really drive compliance. So
Yeah.
we would attend, and same thing with accessory dwelling units, when the state made those legal or we applied our ordinance, the intent was to bring out of the dark those previously illegal basement rentals and things to just drive fire life safety and
And I
compliance.
propose we legalize meth cooking,
As long as
as
it's
long
safe.
as we can tax it.
But you get the transient room tax is one of those.
Did I get a second?
We're unlikely
Okay.
in North Ogden, short of a gondola or some other major
Yeah.
tipping point, to probably get a hotel. I don't know if that's the case. It seems like we'd be unlikely to get a hotel. But transient room tax is one of those +1 taxes that we could potentially get, and it's small. But
Yeah, I just, you're swaying me more and more, but as far as like, I could go either way, but I kind of think, well, the pros and cons for representing the members of this community, which is a large portion of single family homes. It's,
Well, the people who want to use the service are going to be very much in favor. The people who don't and have to live next to it are going to be very much opposed. That's the reality of the
And you look at
situation.
the averages.
And you also
Yes.
have the other side though of the people who happen to maybe have done well and have the funds to invest in some real estate that might want to buy the house next door when it comes up for sale or just down the
Yeah,
road and be able to do
or the
so.
Air Force guy.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily going to be the house next door. This is going to be
You're right.
the guy in St. George that wants to buy the house here, or the guy from Iowa who wants to buy the house here.
Yeah.
So I think, and I don't have any interest in making them money. Really,
Yeah.
even though we can collect some, we can tax it and all that kind of stuff. I care about the community here.
I like the owner occupied, and I like somehow the code being a step towards this enforcement. We've got an enforcement gap right now, and whatever step we're going to take next, we need to get a better handle on how we have people create transparency to what they're doing. And I'm probably as bad as anybody else with that. you know, even going back to the example of May staying at a place in Hawaii, like, well, I was a good renter, they weren't a good renter, you know, type thing. Well, it's like what the city needs is they need to have transparency there in order to enforce whatever it's an hour or 24 hours or something. Like when the police are called, we need to have those plaques to have the numbers. You know, we need to have a business license that has a number. Otherwise, we're going to be getting further and further behind.
I'm sorry, I'm not completely sold on owner occupied for this.
Okay.
I'm just not, I think it's nice. I don't think it's essential. Because a lot of people buy a home with the idea I could do short-term rentals on this, but even though if the home's down a mile, 2 miles away. And they're using that as an income. But they're not home or occupant, they're not living there, but they're use somewhere else, but they're available. You can get to them, you can talk to them. They have emergency backups and they're following all the codes.
Do they
So
have a
why are they
vested
being
interest in
punished?
mobile
Because
law?
but why are they being punished? Because they don't live on the property.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe.
you don't want to short-term rent property that is crappy and clean and, or not clean and dingy.
Right.
I mean, all of them that I've ever been in are typically
Oh,
as well kept as anywhere else in the
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood.
Right.
It's
I'd agree with
it's
that.
the long-term rentals that you get better and or worse renters and
Yep.
better or worse landlords, but short-term rentals are typically run as a business and they don't want bad reviews. They don't want to
Right.
be known as the
Yep.
party house. And I don't have any empirical data to back that up other than, you know, people who I know who run them are typically, they don't want bad renters in there. They don't want their neighbors mad at them. They're trying to run them as.
Does the discussion tonight give you any direction?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, Commission, I don't think we're ready to make a recommendation in any
No.
way, shape, or form here.
No.
Like our thoughts are kind of all over. and-
We're kind of like, I'm kind of like in your camp where, well, it doesn't really benefit the large portion of the community. Why allow them at all? What would we lose if we didn't? But your point is well taken, Mr. Hess, is that they're gonna do it anyway. And if they're gonna do it anyway, then at least we've got some teeth in an ordinance to, you know, collect some taxes for fine them or, you know, do some sort of enforcement or track them or something,
So
you know, so it's sort of like.
can we at least give him direction? Are we somewhat, and we don't need to be unanimous. Can we take the issue in the residential, in the R2, the multifamily zones?
Let me ask you,
So
something, Scott, have you got direction to work with right now?
Well, I can write, yeah, I do. I feel like
I
I
don't
can
want to-
present. If
I
you want
guess
me
I
to
don't
just
want to go back and
present some-
rehash all this over again. We've already rehashed it about 5 or 6 times.
So let's get specific for him. I'm asking the question how we feel about the multifamily zone. Is it allowed? Is it not allowed?
Not
Not allowed.
Or do we, we
Are
don't
we
need to be
unanimous with
unanimous.
that?
We don't need to be unanimous.
Sure.
So, but does that give you enough guidance there that I think that there's not a desire to see that? And to actually put words in an ordinance that would
Disallow that.
disallow that, yeah. You're looking at me like you want to say something.
Is that permitted?
I don't know, I just sit up here, I don't know. You guys are supposed to keep me
I probably
honest.
should have made comments earlier, but I just been thinking about this because I have a bit of a unique experience and I don't know how it impacts the direction of the discussion, but I have a bit of personal experience that I think is a little bit different than the average person in that. I live in a historic district in Ogden. And so there's a lot of homes with a high degree of architectural character, and that's recognized, and it's probably reflected in the rental rates. But point being is that I actually am on the other side of things, of like being the neighbor to homes that were used as short-term rentals for probably a period of 3 years. And I think I'm guessing there, but one was probably 3 years. It might have been a little different. The other one was somewhere around the same time where there was not a owner occupant on the things that, and I came at it, I think with a relatively open mind as a neighbor. The idea didn't really bother me too much, but as time went on, I noticed a couple of things. The first was parking over time, that it was hard to find a spot on the street on weekends, particularly during the summer. The second was the issue of noise. And going back to the point about being a historic district and architectural character, one of the homes in particular was rented out for things like wedding receptions and parties and things like that. And so the noise, it didn't really bother me. Like it didn't bother me in the sense it didn't usually keep me up, but it was like more just, it creates a different environment in the neighborhood. I don't see that necessarily being as big of an issue in North Ogden because you're dealing with newer homes and you're probably not gonna have a lot of homes that are maybe rented as a wedding reception, like sort of, like event, where a reception is held. But my situation might be a little bit different. But that became a bit of an issue. And then it doesn't seem like, this may not seem very convincing, but when it goes on for 3 years, it changes the feeling that you have about your neighborhood and your experience. And what I found was that my street sort of ended up feeling like the outdoor version of a hotel lobby. If that makes sense. Like it commercialized the street. We lost a sense of neighborhood and neighborliness. In that I knew when I walked out the door, and particularly on Friday or Saturday afternoons or something like that, I was going to be seeing people who were not going to be there for a long time. They weren't neighbors. There was no point in investing in a relationship and saying hello or whatever. There was one time where I was yelled at by an inebriated person on the other, on the porch steps that was sitting there. I'm the sort of person that mostly just laughs at that sort of thing and goes about my day. But what was interesting to me was, and the one that was a reception, the additional issue there was the size of the property and the lot probably contributed to the noise, right? If you're in a smaller one, probably not going to get rented as a reception center in the summer months and things like that. But what I was surprised at is that I was less in favor of them after 3 or so years than I was at the beginning, and it was more of a factor of a long, slow grind of wear, right? It was like, I didn't mind it, for the first year, I didn't mind it for the second or whatever, but after 3 years, it was like, gosh, really like some neighbors, or whatever, instead of these. So I don't know, maybe I should have said that right before you jumped up.
We were about to wrap this thing up. I know.
But I just realized that not everyone has that experience of being repeatedly on that side of things. The one unique factor about mine again is that there's a lot of, like, I'm in an officially designated historic district, and so you probably get a higher degree of rental and certain types of use that are rental for reception type activities that are probably excessive compared to the average rental type that you get in if you threw a dart at 1,000 homes, mine be an outlier in that sense. But anyway, I just thought I'd just throw that out there.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, we still ask some specifics. Do you have specific questions for us?
No, the notes that I've written down is someone to be at the property within an hour, dedicated phone number.
This is your turn to say yes or no to these things.
Review the penalties and enforcement strategies, the not permitted in multifamily, and consider owner occupied. And I could do more research on ordinances that require owner occupied versus not, and other like +1 requirements for non-owner occupied.
And per the recommendation of the police officer, I think we put the onus on the person to get there. Police call when they call, they leave a message. If they're not doing it, police can enforce that later.
Right.
It take as much pressure off of our officers as possible, but put the pressure on the homeowner.
Okay.
However that language is.
I still need to need emergency backup in case the owner can't make it there in an hour.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Emergency, that's secondary.
And I'm likely still going to be oppose all of this. Not that these aren't good things, but I think in general, I think I'm going to remain.
And I did like a lot of the language that you had in there about the parking requirements, there was some, standard stuff in the ordinance draft that you had in there that all that was still valuable. It just wasn't an issue.
To validate something that Vice Commissioner Mason just said, Scott, as you're writing this, when you feel areas get a little too hairy and prohibitive, I would second what Commissioner Mason is saying is when it gets too complicated, we just say no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I don't think there's anything wrong with saying no.
There isn't.
You know, if we can find places where it kind of seems like it works and it's doable, great. But if it gets hairy and you look at it as you're writing it, like, "Ah, it's just gonna be better to say no." It feels like there's a little bit of an overtone for at least two of us, and
Right.
I don't know what the other three.
And I just think of the people we represent, and I would say 90% or more of the people in North Ogden probably would have no issue if
With
there
being
was, if
no.
it was not permitted.
Yeah,
Well, I think.
Zero issue.
yeah,
We
No,
need to
it's
be
so-
care- we need to be careful about walking into property rights.
totally.
And like, if you come out flat, say no on something like this, you're walking into some property right issues you may want to bring up and question.
But I think these are, I believe, I would hope John Call would be jumping in if this was something that was complete, like, hey, this is a violation of someone's property rights, then I think we'd be instructed there. I would hope.
So the state tried to be more aggressive and give cities more power, and it didn't pass this last year. But the state, you're still technically allowed to regulate where, how, and why, and when.
Mhm.
You can't prohibit them all outright in the city, basically. Like, you have to allow for some of them in the right circumstances. And like excluding multifamily is one that's probably really easy to say, hey, it doesn't fit here.
Mhm.
And to add things like, hey, there's the cities that deal with it the most are those that are on the Cottonwood Canyons.
Yeah.
Ironically, that's where there's the most pushback, is because it's very affluent neighborhoods that are being converted over. And so you get very active neighbors. So there are a lot of rules, and we'll go through and scrub them, but most of these examples that were in the packet are active ordinances that cities have that have probably survived at least one challenge.
Yeah.
So there are lots of ways to do it.
Okay.
I mean, I absolutely do respect the fact that, you know, in the absence of an ordinance, people are still going to do this, but there's no teeth to enforce it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That was what was convincing me to your dark side there. So, okay, thanks for the discussion. I think Scott's gone to even take notes on. Let's just go ahead and move on to the next item.
Okay.
So he asked me to bring up that if you want to have it brought back at a future meeting, that you just need to make a motion to
Table it?
Yeah, well, to table it and bring it back.
I don't know.
To discuss it.
I think we should do that.
I'd entertain a motion for that.
I'll make a motion to table it and bring it back.
We have a motion for the item to be tabled, to be revisited.
Second.
Oh, we have a second?
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Lunt has a tabled second. Okay, all in favor, let's go ahead and, I think we've discussed this enough. Tabling this item, Commissioner Lunt, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Webb,
Yes.
Commissioner Nancaro,
Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
and I'm a yes for tabling it. Which means this is going to come before us again for some more discussion. I've given this for our interested public here. You know, at that point, if you care to, but anyone's obviously ever willing to, invited to attend our meeting and speak again. I think your points were well made. You can submit them through email or something to be read at the outset of the meeting as well. So if you'd like to do that again, but your comments were recorded in the public record and will be part of the written record for this meeting. And so they're not lost, and it's all not for naught. But some of these things do get complicated and require further discussion. So
I appreciate your comments tonight.
yeah, that was very enlightening to the specific nature of the multifamily zone. I thought that was very helpful.
And hopefully you feel you've been heard and it's been part of the discussions.
I do, yes.
Good.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's move on to the last item, which is another public hearing. Whoa. And a recommendation or a tabling or whatever for a legislative amendment to revise the trailer parking standards to remove language in a provision in Title 11 already addressed by Title 7 of the City Code. Brandon Bell.
Thanks. I want to make the joke that this will only be half as complex as the last item, but this is probably actually the most simple ordinance amendment I've ever brought to the commission. And all it is a proposal to remove language from an ordinance. So
Move we approve this item?
I'll second that.
Reading this, it sounds like it was duplicated somewhere else, is that right?
So this is, sorry, what's that?
It's been duplicated somewhere else, so I have it two places.
Yes, that's correct, and I'll just go over this brief report on that. So the police department's been reviewing the code. There's been some issues related to on-street parking, and particularly of trailers in the street. The police chief requested that the planning department work with the police department to propose adjustments to regulations in Title 11 that overlap with Title 7, which the police department is responsible for. And they have authority over parking in public right of ways, and that's also what Title 7 addresses. And so as we conferred about this issue, staff concluded that the best way was just to eliminate this particular provision from Title 11. Well, not the whole provision, but most of it. Anything related to on-street parking for, I think, for, I'll have to look at the ordinance to clarify that statement, but so again, this issue is already addressed in Title 7, and so we're just eliminating it so that there's both, it's in the proper jurisdiction of the police, but also for the sake of clarity by eliminating duplication.
So it doesn't change the 2-day requirement, it just is eliminating redundant text.
Correct. The one sentence that we are proposing be left is the last sentence in provision D in the ordinance in Title 11, particularly 11-9M-21. And that statement reads, that sentence reads, in multifamily developments and planned residential unit development projects, recreational vehicles shall only be parked in approved screened storage yards. However, occupancy of any vehicle in the storage yard is prohibited. The reason why that was proposed to be left is because it's not actually addressing on-street parking. That's actually
Can't live in your car.
in the private, yeah. So, well, in your recreational vehicle particularly. So I guess, I don't know, technically, maybe you can't live in your car as long as it's not an RV. So.
You can park those on the street.
Yeah.
There's other provisions that cover that.
So,
Can't live in your RV. We're not, getting the old raging waters problem that they've had down there.
oh, okay.
RV village.
So
Okay,
we're just proposing that anything related to on-street parking in this section of the ordinance be removed. So.
thanks for the text change. Any other questions for Brandon before we open the public hearing?
This would be a recommendation of the city council.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing on this if anyone has any input on this item. Public hearing is open. John, do we still have attendees on Zoom?
We do.
Do we have any raised hands?
No raised hands at this point.
Okay, we'll pause for just a second. Oh, go ahead.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor of closing the public hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, our public hearing is closed. Any other discussion on this item?
And just so you've got the record, it is, you can see this prohibited parking. This is the section where there's the duplicate.
Okay.
Is this 7.3B2A? So.
Okay. In the absence of no further discussion, I would also entertain a motion in this matter.
I'll make a motion that we recommend approval of the proposed text amendment as a means of adjusting city code to be more compliant with the Utah State Code and eliminating conflicting provisions in Title 11 and Title 7 of City Code.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and second. Further discussion? Okay, this was maybe the most straightforward thing we've ever heard. Okay. Commissioner Lunt, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Webb,
Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes,
Commissioner Nancarrow,
Yes.
and I'm a yes, and the motion passes for positive recommendation to the city council for that text change. Great. Okay, we've kind of got through the items on our agenda. Brings us to any other public comments or anything that should be said to the planning commission tonight. Pause for a second. Okay, no other general comments? Okay. Remarks from planning commissioners.
I do, but I'm not sure if there's a proper place to bring it, to
Oh,
maybe
boy.
the city council. I'm glad the police are here. He can answer it for me. I've had people coming and complaining now that Barker Park, Wadman Park, and Oakland Park have become the now dog parks. And the dog park is now becoming less used because people now go to these places. I've been there, they've left out 3 dogs, 4 dogs, and just let them run while I sit on the bench and watch it. This morning, a guy left Wadman Park and the guy pulled up without 3 Dobermans. He just turned around and left. He goes, I can't be there. He just sat on a bench and walked in. And they just asked me, these places, what can be done? Because one guy was approached, the police was called, the guy approached, told him to put on a leash. Guy put him on a leash and the police left. He took him off the leash. Just, I'll just keep doing that because police aren't doing anything anyway. Now, I don't know what you can and can't do.
It's not that we can't do anything. It's, we have a leash all. They have to be on a leash in the public park. Be nice if they would use the dog park.
Right.
But with that being said, they could call us. If they put in on a leash, everyone has a cell phone now.
Right.
Snap a photo, snap a video. We can come back and have animal control and force the dog at large at that point.
Oh,
Okay, what enforcement do you have? But
We
I can
have
kind of let these people know.
the dog at large. They could call us and report it to us. These people are at Barker Park, Bottom Park, whatever they are. The dogs are off leash, but everyone's like, oh, my dog's friendly. But
Yeah.
the other dog that's off leash may not be friendly,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and that's a conflict there. So
take a video and picture, that's a good idea.
have them call it in, if they put them on the leash, like verbal warning to them initially, dog has to be on a leash, it's within the city ordinance. And if we leave and they immediately take the dog off the leash, the complaint is still there. Everyone has, cell phones are
They're
a
not.
blessing and
Curse, yeah.
and a curse at the same time.
Everyone's got a body cam now.
Yep, so.
But you're right, the friendly thing I taught my grandkids with dogs off leash, you do not approach that dog, you do not ask to pet that dog. As long as that dog's off leash, that owner has no control over that dog.
Just
So
like
do
we
not
had
even
the North
approach.
Dog Night Out last night. There was multiple dogs there. Every dog out there was on a leash.
Yeah.
They're abiding by those rules.
Mhm.
So they just call it in, it's I was sergeant in the city of Harrisville, Franklin, North Ogden. And we had 3 parks in Harrisville. When I first came to North Ogden, I worked side by side North Ogden for almost 10 years. I didn't realize North Ogden had so many parks, so I became an officer. So we do have a lot of parks. And typically between swings and grays, anywhere between 6 and 2 officers on, depending on what
Mhm.
portion of the night it is. So we can't hit every park. We try to hit all the
It's
parks.
hard.
We hit all the parks once a night, at least to block of the bathrooms.
Mm.
But we're still doing active patrol and everything of that nature.
Okay.
So if they have an issue, call it in.
Just remember, you're still in the dog days of summer for another week.
Yeah.
It goes till August 11th. I just Googled it.
That's okay. I
Okay.
recommend.
Dad joke right there.
Ooh, that was bad. Yeah, but let's get that one off the record. That and my respect.
It
for
doesn't matter in the
It's the
winter.
thing that-
the winter time, no matter
sometimes
what.
it's, a lot of times these people, they know the mayor or city council, correct? They'll email the mayor and city council. And it comes down the chain through Chief Quay to us.
Yeah.
But we can't, it's hard to enforce anything if we get the message a day later.
Mhm.
Yeah.
People don't
So
call.
call it
Thanks
in
for
when
the
it
info, sir.
happens.
So
Yeah.
where that's not really related to planning, let's go ahead and,
Yeah, I just,
that's okay, Scott. I think I thought that was pertinent.
Yeah.
Or,
it's
I think
just
that's
something
good
I can tell people.
yep,
Mhm.
no, I thought that was a fine comment. And other comments?
Just grateful for the comments tonight, grateful for, your detective, is that your official title? Thank you for weighing in here. I think you've added a lot of light on a lot of things, so appreciate you being here and
Try to
making
keep
comments.
quiet, but some people just.
No, it's good. It's good, and staff, Brandon Bell's comment about the experience that he had next door, very enlightening.
Yeah, I do remind people in the audience, we kind of suspended some of our rules. Normally when in a public meeting, there's a very specific time when we can speak, and we suspended that for both of you guys. So, which was fine, and I thought it was well made and well appreciated, but you may not get that in a city council meeting or something like that. So some of this interaction. So just be aware of that. So any other comments for the planning commission?
No.
What about from our planning director?
So just a reminder that August 23rd, which is a Tuesday, not your normal meeting night, is a joint training with City Council at 6 p.m. with Benj Becker to look at financing public improvements.
What night was that?
It's Tuesday, the 23rd,
6 PM.
6:00 p.m. We'll do about an hour of training with,
In lieu of, or will we have back-to-back meetings, sir?
we will have the meeting the prior week.
Oh, the prior week.
Yeah,
Oh, that's right.
On the 17th.
Yeah.
Correct. Wednesday of the prior week, third Wednesday of the month. This would be the fourth Tuesday of the month. We'll hold training.
Okay.
Is it 6 p.m. or is that when the meeting starts? Like, when do you want us there?
Yes and yes. The meeting, we will be the first part of the meeting. So
My-
we'll be there a few minutes.
My wife has a conflict that night, but I could get the kids to bed and Zoom it. Is that possible?
Sure.
To the
Yeah,
training?
It'll
Okay.
be, you can participate. If you want to just listen passively on YouTube and just let me know that you were
Okay,
available for it, then I can mark you down as an hour of training.
perfect.
We'll have a Zoom on it.
Anything else, Mr. Hess?
Yep, and the other thing is we've been working on two important things. One is the codification of the new Title 11, Title 12, that's the combined into Title 11. That passed through Planning Commission in November, something, and then it took a little while, it got to March for the City Council, and we're finally around to actually codifying that with Unicode now. So you'll see the revised code online shortly, within hopefully 2 weeks or less. And then the other is the Modern Income Housing Plan is coming back to meet the state requirements of an implementation plan. So the language has been changed. We were pretty aspirational before. We had more than our 3 state required moderate income housing plan sections. Staff's recommendation is going to be to limit those, to probably pare it back to 3 or maybe the 5. 5 gives us priority funding opportunity for state funding, but we also don't have a whole lot of major transportation corridors that are on the Wasatch Front Regional Council long range plan. So we should kind of monitor, or we should decide what we want to monitor in our implementation plan versus the realities of actually getting another big pot of that state funding. Our Washington Boulevard was built with one of those WFRC grants that ultimately state funds came around the cycle, and it was applied for 6 years ago. And so those projects do come up. Monroe would be, so you've got Monroe, Mountain Road, 2650, and just a couple other stretch of Washington Boulevard and a few bits and pieces of the city. At any rate, we're going to bring that back to you next meeting. So be prepared for a discussion on the moderate income housing plan, and to do just maybe a little bit of research. I'll send you the white paper from on what the code changes were, and just be prepared to look through that.
If you bring back the 5, would you tag one of those particular areas that to target for that funding or no?
Well, they're just different now. So they include an implementation schedule. So before where it might have been,
Yeah, and I've read that.
consider alternate options for cohabitable housing, or what are they called, Brandon? The housing coalitions, right?
Mhm.
And before it might have been like consider or look at, and now it's how are you implementing this thing in your community? And it's going to be just much more specific. And if we aren't able to show those specifics, we can't just have the pie in the sky, like we want to do all of these things that state's actually tracking implementation.
Well, to me, the Monroe one makes a lot of sense to like look at that for some sort of transition. You've got Ron Claire, you've got some transition there, and then you got transition into our community. And if we had extra funding to help kind of buffer some of those things, that could be helpful.
Sorry, I'm not
confused.
understanding
What you're saying.
I was confusing in what I was saying. So the state took a carrot and a stick approach. So let's say it's a stick approach. So if we don't comply with our moderate income housing plan, the stick that the carrot or the stick that the state wields is that you are ineligible to receive state transportation funding. For some communities that are crisscrossed by state highways or have these major projects that they're applying for regularly, think like Salt Lake Valley areas or Ogden, it's a huge piece of their capital investment funding. So they comply, and really everyone complied. I mean, there was no one, it's from Cameron Deal at Utah League of Cities and Towns. The cities that didn't comply were typically small staff that ultimately ended up complying, but they just didn't make it in time because they didn't have the staff to develop the plans. So if you the state code says you have to have 3 of these menu items to be eligible for state funds. If you hit 5, you're in a priority position. And I don't even know what that means. Like it's probably 1 extra point on the list when you write your application out.
Got it.
That will bump you up the list, but it doesn't mean you're guaranteed transportation funding. But the funding that would be held and or prioritized is all related specifically to transportation improvements on regional sized facilities, or like collector and above type of roads.
Yeah. Yep.
So we'll look at it. They're just much more specific now, and the plan will be more specific to the implementation components. And in that way, I would say let's be realistic with what we think we can actually do.
Yeah. So would they specifically with that, like the stuff that Kai brought forward about Mountain Road and the Monroe extension, would some of the lighting and things like that, would that be funding that could potentially be?
Yeah, so we could, if we were ready with our match, for instance, our 6.77% match for federal funds, we could, as a city, say, we are ready to construct Monroe Boulevard in 6 years. We want to apply for the funding that would connect 2600 to 2100. And we want to build the road in conjunction with developers. And then say that we're approved, we would have our 6 years to develop our match. The funding comes up the list because they pre-program those dollars out, and then the roadway gets built. And if in that time we weren't in compliance with our moderate income housing plan, the state could strip that eligibility of funding away. But those projects, well, the state funded projects are typically not, I don't want to say bare bones, but they fund the major transportation investment. And as a city, if we wanted to do the plantings or the additional lighting or whatever, that would be part of our match. We would add that to it. And sometimes you get those built in, but for the most part, like look at what the Washington Boulevard project, there were trade-offs there. We have a single-sided sidewalk. It's not the fanciest road in the world. It meets the transportation demand for the future, right? But it didn't include everything under the sun that we could have wanted, because there just isn't always money to build the utilities and build sidewalks.
Yeah.
So,
And buy houses.
and buy houses.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Great.
But you'll
Thank
see,
you.
yeah, you'll see it coming up. I don't remember, John, do you remember, is it October 1 or October 30? It's soon.
I think it's October 1.
Yeah. It went from like seeming far away to being almost scary, scary close.
It used to be December 1st.
Yeah.
And then they bumped it up. I think they bumped it up 2 months.
Yeah, to October 1, but we have to have our implementation scheduled up. And it'll be pretty simple. It's just what we plan to do and the amount of time. And you guys can weigh in.
That's the one thing before we adjourn. Mrs. Corcoran, I would encourage you to get the addresses of those units that are short-term rentals and just verify with the city that they actually are permitted.
I've done that. One of them was not, and
Sorry,
I've
I don't
done
want to encourage you to
everything
be
I
a
can
rat,
do
but you
so
know.
far, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Scott, did that conclude everything you had for us? Okay, then last item is any remarks from our city manager / attorney.
Just if you haven't seen in your email that we sent an update for the employee barbecue summer party on September 1st, technically in the fall. But it was originally going to be next Tuesday, which I'm sure we'll see many of you there anyways at the Truth and Taxation hearing. We just couldn't do both on the same night. So
You're not going to get everyone's comments.
yeah, that's why I'm last, because you can't comment on my comment. So right. But no, we've been fielding lots of phone calls related to that one, obviously, and it's the hardest thing about property taxes is hardly anyone understands them except for if you're the county assessor, and it's just not an easy process. So,
I don't think they understand them either.
yeah, so it's not an easy process, and it's anyways. So feel free to come participate. The council is looking for feedback. So
That's across the street, right?
yep,
Next
at
Tuesday?
Senior Center at 8 p.m.
Is that 8?
There will need to be a police presence.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Pitchforks and-
Will need to be a police presence. I hope you're prepared. Okay. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay.
I move that we adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor of adjournment? Aye. Any opposed? Thanks, everyone.
No, I'm just working my schedule around, so I don't have to come to the chair, so I can work that.
No, I've had that chair before. It's
Terrible.
like,
Yeah.
you're like you're at the little kids.
Yeah.
And they keep you keep like moving it up and it just.
There is.
Oh, there is.
I think,
One of my neighbors was looking for property. and she says, next door was this house, like, he just stacked up with the big scoreboard. I mean, it just seems
It's been a long day.
horrible.
says no more than 4.
Oh, yeah.
So that's gerbils, hamsters, guinea pigs, and rabbits, no 4, no more than 4 in combination. Animals, yeah. It's code enforcement out of control. Because they fall through the evaluation.
Okay. And I have one other thing. So where can I find out, our streets are private? How do I just want to know what that means, like,
I joke about.
because we've had like a problem with speeders lately. And several of the neighbors go like, well, the cops aren't gonna respond because these are private roads, and I said, no, they will. But how do I find, where do I
So
read to?
they can respond for what they consider excessive, but a posted private speed limit is enforceable.
So
Yeah, we do have.
in HOA, there's only certain citations we actually, as an officer of the city of Utah, could give on private property.
Mhm.